This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and I'm with Thom van Every, who's a candidate in this forthcoming election for the new West Surrey Council. He's standing in Guildford South East. He's currently the chairman of the Conservative Association in Guildford. Welcome to the Guildford Dragon, Thom. This is your first appearance on the Dragon.
Hello, Martin. Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this series of interviews. It's a pleasure to be here.
And you're jumping in at the deep end here with an election coming up, I'm you might find some of the questions challenging, but that's the nature of the game. Um, I start off by saying many people have still lost faith in the Conservative Party, haven't they? I mean, first there was a debacle of the 2019 local plan locally, and an unprecedented collapse in the Tory vote at the Borough Council, something it had dominated for decades. Then there was the debacle of the Boris Johnson and Liz Truss premierships. In Guildford Borough, you've lost the truest of the bluest wards in the east of the borough, previously some of the safest seats in the county. Do you really have any optimism about this forthcoming election?
So, yes, I do, is the short answer. Both personally and I think also for the association. I'm definitely an optimist. I am a medical doctor by training, but also an entrepreneur, and I've built up and sold a variety of businesses, and I'm definitely happy to face up to the challenges we face. That's at a personal level. I think your question about the Conservatives is a fair observation, and I think the data supports that we have lost support over the last 14 years, particularly in government. That is the case. What I don't think has changed, though, and maybe what we haven't been particularly good at continually articulating, is the values that drive what we do. And I think core Conservative values actually remain very popular, and those values being self-reliance, aspiration, support for enterprise and entrepreneurship, small efficient government, respect for tradition, and strong on law and order. Those values from the Conservatives, I think, remain as they have always done. Maybe we just lost our way somewhat at articulating those and seeing the world through those values in the past, but certainly they are alive and well in the Guildford Conservatives.
So, what's your prediction for this election? How many seats do you think you're likely to win?
Well, I think in the Guildford area, we already hold some seats, such as Worplesdon and Sheer, and obviously we have had support in the past for the Horsleys. So I'm confident we're going to win some seats. I'm absolutely sure of that. I think there are some other grayer areas. I'm in Guildford South East, and obviously we had a snap by-election in October last year, which didn't go so well for us. But we've been putting in a strong campaign, and the sentiment on the doors is, I think, much more positive than I maybe saw in October.
So, do you think? I mean, nationally, you have recovered in the national polling, and you're now from the Politico poll I checked just before this interview started. You're neck and neck with Labour in the national polling at about 17 or 18%. Do you think there's a chance you could win control of West Surrey Council?
I think there's always that chance. I think there's always that chance.
Well, I should say, do you think it's likely?
Um, I, I think it's going to be very close to call. So at the moment, I'm obviously the optimist, and I'm going to be optimistic about it. You reference those polls, and it's interesting to hear that information. There's some other interesting data which I think is also relevant, and that is the number of people around the country who would consider the Conservatives. So not necessarily saying they're straight out Conservatives, but would consider the Conservatives. And I understand from the data that the Conservative Party represents the highest party in that group, i.e., another party you might consider. And I take that as a sign that while maybe the electorate has not completely forgotten some of the aspects of the 14 years we had in government, because some of the things we did in government were very positive. While they haven't forgotten all the aspects, there is a recognition, I think, that going back to the Conservative values, when you compare them to the current Labour government, particularly, we are a competent and strong party.
Okay, now I'm looking at your campaign leaflet, the one for Guildford South East, And there are six. I would describe them as promises here that you've made, and I'd like to go through them. First of all, you're
Sure.
going to fix Surrey's roads. How are you going to do that?
Well, we have already, at Surrey County Council level, allocated budget to increase the repair and expenditure on the roads. I think it's fair to say it's been a tricky time on the roads, not just because of um, repair rates, but also the weather has been exceptionally bad. And it's not just in Guildford, obviously, it's been around the country. So the plan is to invest more in roads where possible. And um, that may have to be funded by extra expenditure through debt or some other prioritization. But clearly, this will be no surprise to you, knocking on the doors potholes come up again and again and again, and that's something that we are prepared to commit, and we have indeed committed to repairing, a substantial portion over the next term.
Okay, well, in your promise, you say you're going to resurface every road that needs it. When are you going to do that by?
That will be over the term of the next
Over the
authority.
5 years.
Yeah.
Okay, and I also note that you say you're going to extra debt if you need to for that.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of talk about debt, as you
Yeah,
probably
we will
have.
get onto the debt issue,
Okay,
but I just
okay.
want to part
So,
that you and note that you said that. Okay, and
well, maybe just to clarify that these are existing plans Surrey County Council has of serviceable levels of debt for investment, not as a patch.
okay. The next promise, well, I mean, I'm not taking them in the same order they are on the leaflet, but best education for every child, protect high standards, and demand better support for children with additional needs. So, what's your plan to achieve that?
So again, that will involve a mixture of looking across the whole of Surrey and trying to ensure that best practice gets replicated. And it will also require, I think, redirection of some of the funding. I'm not involved in the educational side myself, but it will really, I think, come from ensuring focus on it, some further investment. And we know that various MPs, Conservative MPs in Surrey-wide have been advocating and speaking in Parliament about the need to improve the SEND education, and I think it'll all be part of that.
I'm sure everyone would want that, but again, you did mention further investment there. So, where's that going to come from?
Well, again, Surrey County Council already has plans which will continue because they aren't just one-year plans. Hundreds of millions of investment that is planned and is serviceable through appropriate interest rates that's payable. So I'm really talking about something that is already in motion, if you like. This is not necessarily new debt that doesn't exist already, or at least
Okay.
within the budget plans.
Now, the next one I'm going to talk about is provide the homes we need. Some people might think, well, my goodness, with all the building that's going on in Surrey already, aren't we already doing that? What more homes do we need than the ones that are
Well,
already being built?
I guess there are new homes and existing homes that are unlivable, and I think unlivable in currently because they're not fully repaired. And I think that's an entirely fair criticism, frankly, of the Guildford Borough Council Lib Dem leadership, is that we have a substantial number of homes that are not in a livable state and need repair. And the management of that is critical because that is existing stock which cannot be used. And I won't repeat to your readers, I'm sure that they're aware of some of the challenges around the housing budget and where that money has gone. At the same time, I also believe, as a conservative, that we should look to really sweat brown site and grey site assets where we can make appropriate and culturally similar styles of accommodation within the Guildford area. We're strong advocates for the development of the riverside, the appropriate development of the riverside to provide more accommodation. And as a conservative who believes in aspiration and giving people the chance to own a house and get on in their life, we think that's appropriate.
Do you agree with the government's definition of grey belt, so-called grey belt?
I'm not actually familiar with the exact definition. You'd have to tell me.
Well, when they first brought this up, they gave the example of derelict garages, but now we've seen green field sites described as grey belt. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, so I wouldn't recognize a green field as a grey site. I would recognize it as a green field site. And I think the priority should not be developing greenfield sites. I think what we've seen is a Labour government which has deprioritized sites in areas that it wishes to avoid building, such as in London, and pushed it out to the suburbs with, I have to say, Lib Dem support into places like Guildford and Surrey, when actually it would be much better to build more in London, firstly, but relevant obviously for Guildford is to make sure we develop the opportunities within the town itself rather than necessarily sprawl out into our beautiful area.
But in West Surrey Council's not going to have any control over this, is it? The government have tied it up so tightly that the councils can only really pass planning applications through.
I don't agree with that, and I think this comes down to making sure that the voters in Guildford elect people who are going to fight for Guildford. I think, the West Surrey is going to elect 90 new councillors in 45 wards. And I really hope that the electorate in Guildford pay attention to the interests and commitment of the people they elect, because this is an opportunity to make sure plans for Guildford, getting Guildford moving, both in its kind of residence infrastructure and its economy, are advocated for and lobbied for by people who really believe in it. I've lived in Guildford for almost 50 years on and off, and Guildford is a wonderful place, no doubt. It feels like it's lost its mojo, and it will take committed, enthusiastic councillors who believe in Guildford to get it moving.
Okay, how do you see the planning committee being organised in West Surrey Council? Because I think a lot of people are worried that, how can a Guildford councillor decide what's best in Spelthorne on planning, or vice versa? I mean, I don't know much about Spelthorne. I don't know if you do.
I don't.
No, and so how could you possibly decide on a can be quite a detailed planning application where local knowledge is really important.
Well, I don't have any inside information into how the planning process is going to work, but I can imagine there's going to have to be some subgroups or subcommittees that will have some influence or at least say in how things work, because I think the point you make is a fair one. How can a very dispersed group of people make these decisions? I don't claim, because as you've indicated, this is my first time standing, to be an expert in the planning process, but that would be my preference, would be to obviously have some subgroups.
But surely your party has been thinking about this and what they're going to fight for when they get elected in the new council.
Yes, they have, and that's why they're putting forward, I think, candidates who are, from the local areas and are going to be passionate about fighting for local representation in that larger council. But I think it remains a risk that local voices are at risk of getting drowned out unless they are very well advocated for. And certainly,
But from
I'm
what you
prepared to do
say,
that.
you'll be trying to create a system where the overall planning committee is divided so that local views can be properly represented. Is that a fair summary?
I think and again, I'm not an expert in the planning process, so you'll have to forgive me. But my wish would be a sensible trade-off between getting decisions done and having people who are maybe best placed to understand the impact locally at the forefront of those decisions. That's the detail I can give you in my mind.
Okay. Now I'd like to move on to the next promise here, which is to um, provide free garden waste collection. How much is that going to cost?
Well, just to be clear, the promise is to allow one free bin per household, which is the vast majority of bins.
It doesn't say that here.
No, it doesn't say that. I'm telling you now,
Okay.
just to give you a sense of the cost. So that garden waste approximate net income in Guildford is probably around just over 1 million, I would, based on the estimates I have, and that is the revenue. It will be somewhat offset. So it's not going to be a pure cost to the council to give this up. It will be somewhat offset, firstly, by a reduction in landfill use. So it is currently the case that some people use garden waste um, and put it into the grey bin, as I call it, and that grey bin goes into landfill, which is expensive. So by removing that incentive, we will be shifting some of that garden waste into the garden waste bins, which obviously can be used in other ways. It doesn't generate a profit, but that cost can be offset. So it won't be a pure loss of that income. It will be an element of it.
But there'll be extra costs on the collection, won't there?
Not I well, I think several things. Firstly, once there is harmonization, if you like, of the services across West Surrey, there will be an opportunity to get some economies of scale in that collection, i.e., the kind of swarming of the bin collection using assets from around West Surrey. So I don't think the marginal cost of having an extra bin will be significant to the collection of it.
But
To be
it's going to
honest.
the round of the collection round is going to take longer, isn't it?
Um, If you have the same number of trucks, yes, this is what I'm saying. I'm sure there are clever ways to manage the demand on the trucks. It may well be that there are some additional assets needed, but I think the take-home message is it's not a pure loss of income for the authority based on the revenue they currently take, because it will be offset, I think, partly by the reduced use of landfill.
Okay, so you think it's going to be affordable?
I think it's going to come at a cost, but I don't think it's going to come at a full cost. But yes, overall, is it going to be affordable? Yes.
Okay, and now we've got the next promise, which is free parking for the first hour. Now, I know from covering Guildford Borough Council that the income they get from parking is, you know, in the top three, I think, of the income revenue streams they have. Can they afford to lose that amount of income?
Well, I think parking is very elastic in relation to the cost. And what I mean by that is the cost of parking influences people's behavior. And we've seen this in places like Camberley. When you raise the income too much, when you raise the price too much, the cost of parking, people use it less. And the modeling that will have been done, I wasn't directly involved in the modeling, so I'm afraid I can't give you a cell by cell account of the spreadsheet. But the modeling that has been done um, is based on that elasticity. And actually, we may get higher amounts of traffic through. Um, and it won't simply be a loss to the council. Now, there will be the additional benefit, and this is part of our message more broadly in our campaign about supporting Guildford's economy, getting Guildford moving, and really driving the high street and its regeneration. As I say, I've been here many years, and while the high street remains vibrant, it could be much better, I think. And so it one of the trade-offs of not having a full loss of that revenue from the parking, but some of it will be a boost to the high street.
Okay, but I'm just curious that that you're talking about giving away something without really knowing if it's going to be affordable, because
Well, let me add further detail. So I think there is a broad assumption across different political parties, across different councils, both borough and obviously Surrey County Council, that this creation of West Surrey and East Surrey is an opportunity to get some economies and scale and savings. Now, the amounts will vary, and I can accept there are different models, but there is an agreement there are savings available. So I think some of these policies, such as the 1 hour free parking, such as the free waste collection, come into that kind of big picture of there are some savings to be had. They may not occur tomorrow, but there are some savings to be had. And within that envelope, this is an opportunity to bring some value back to the electorate.
do you think there's spare capacity in Guildford's car park?
Yes, it's a very good question. I do. Yes, I do. Not all the time, obviously. It depends on on when you go. But my anecdotal observation is often there is some spare capacity.
Okay, because I suspect some people will say, "Crikey! Every time I try to get into the car park, it's I can hardly find a space."
Well, there are some car parks that are busier than others. So I'm in Guildford. I live in Guildford Southeast, and I think where your comment may hold up more than in other car parks might be the Castle car park, which is often quite busy. But anecdotally, I think we are not running at full capacity. And as I said, because consumer behavior is elastic in this term, there is an opportunity actually to optimize it.
Okay. Now, you mentioned about economies of scale there, but I looked up uh, the House of Commons Library on their experience of unitaries, the creation of unitaries, and the savings they allow. And the comment was that the savings are difficult to realise and are certainly not short term. And I think anyone who's lived through any kind of amalgamation or merger where there are promises of great savings know that these things are often difficult to realize. Don't you think it's going to be years before we see any real savings at West Surrey Council?
I think your observations about the complexity of this are spot on. In fact, I would say there are several risks of this whole process. One of them is absolutely realizing the benefits of this integration. Certainly, I've worked in in the corporate world and the private sector, mergers and acquisitions. Even the private sector don't always deliver the value they're meant to do.
Exactly.
So I think it is a real risk. I would come back to really making sure that the electorate, when they're ticking or crossing the box, I should say, on their voting slip, is that they really think, are they voting for people who have good knowledge and experience, are committed to paying attention to the boring but seriously important detail of making the merger a success? Or are they voting in people who are going to rush off and try and do vanity projects? The first step must be to get this right. So to answer your question, I think there's a risk not all the savings are generated. I think that's a fair challenge. The way to address that risk is to vote in the best people to get it done.
Okay, now a lot of these things have been alluding to funding. And of course, there's the elephant in the room with the funding, which is the legacy debt. Now, the legacy debt was created by Conservative councils, Woking, Spelthorne, Runnymede. How do you see that issue being dealt with? I mean, it's going to be a, a huge burden for this new council, isn't it?
I'm going to answer your question, but I just want to correct one thing before I get there. So if we take Woking's debt, for example, the Liberal Democrats supported that, I think, bar one councillor. So it's interesting how they
They
rush
may
off
have
and
done,
don't
but
comment
they
on
were
that.
not
But
in charge of the administration, were they?
they voted to support it in, and it's not the only debt, of course. Guildford Borough Council has debt. But I to your
Yeah,
question,
but
um,
not on the same scale. 300,000, I think, at GBC.
um, to your question, I believe that the debt is going to be a major concern, and we should all be rightfully concerned about it. My understanding is that we already have 500 million committed from the government to help with that, but I think it seems very likely, and I believe this is the direction of travel, that there will need to be, firstly, some continued funding. I don't have the details of that, but there's going to have to be some sort of rationalization of assets to help relieve that debt. And that'll be an important part of, I imagine, the shadow work that occurs after May the 7th. So, the debt will definitely hang over West Surrey more than East Surrey, but West Surrey will be generating more revenues and has more assets. So it's something that's going to have to be very carefully managed. And again, electing good, competent people who are committed to solving that problem is going to be critical.
But I mean, it was your party that um, wanted to be in the vanguard of this devolution, so-called devolution exercise. And Surrey is going into it quicker than other counties. Um, wasn't it negligent to do that when this whole debt issue hadn't been resolved?
Well, I don't think it's negligent. No, I think putting yourself forward to resolve these challenges is very responsible because these challenges, if you like, the acceleration and solving them is going to happen maybe faster than it may otherwise have done. So
Well,
personally, I don't.
sorry to interrupt, but you're saying that this reorganization could help resolve the debt issue.
Well, as I've said, if the government is already committing 500 million, they may not have done that if we were not progressing with this progress. And I think most importantly, we should be trying to get clarity of how we're going to solve this. And if this is a trigger for solving it, then I can only think this is a good thing, frankly. I think it speaks to a bigger problem, though, which is not a political problem. I think we have to, in this country, recognize that the system of local government is not working in its current form as the statutory obligations from central government come down more and more and more. The opportunity for local government to do things beyond its statutory obligations is becoming less and less. And I think this is a symptom of that, not just in conservative councils, in councils of different colours. We have a national problem of the way that local government works. We
But this
already,
historically, I mean, in the time I've been reporting on the Guildford Dragon, historically, the grants have been taken away from local authorities and they've been encouraged to be entrepreneurial. I can even remember when they advertised for a new CEO, they wanted him to be entrepreneurial. And we've seen what happens when you have so-called entrepreneurial councils. They don't understand what they're investing in and they lose loads of money. So surely that all happened under conservative governments. It was a big mistake, wasn't it?
well, I think it's continuing. We can discuss about when it started, but I think that whole process is continuing and reflective of the structural challenges we have. I can accept your comment. They've been trying to hire entrepreneurial people. I don't believe it's been true fiscal independence. And just at a personal level,
Well,
this is
it
not
certainly
a
hasn't, no.
and I think that this is part of the problem. And I'm making a national comment here, not as a candidate for Guildford Southeast. If you look at some other countries who have true fiscal regional independence, I think it works much better. And we've
So,
been
so would you
dabbling in that.
advocate that? Would you advocate that councils are allowed to raise their own taxes without restrictions from central government?
I think that that is a very worthwhile direction of travel. Yes, proper fiscal independence, and I
Okay.
think, and I'm a doctor by training. I think that, and this is my personal opinion. I'm giving you here. I think there should be much more fiscal independence across a whole range of services to allow local governments to better tailor the needs to their local population.
Okay. Now, all these, so I'm still a bit unclear. What are you going to actually do about this debt issue if you're elected as a Guildford councillor on the West Surrey Council? What policy will you be advocating?
Well, firstly, I will be lobbying hard to have central government help resolve this challenge because I think it requires that it's in some way. So
Why
coming up
haven't you
with
been shouting about that before?
um, I think to be fair, I think Surrey County Council, particularly the leader of the council, has been saying exactly that the government is going to need to step in. He
Why
gave a
wasn't he
speech.
doing that before he agreed to Surrey being in the vanguard of this devolution exercise?
Well, I'm afraid I'm not aware whether he was or he wasn't
Okay,
before that,
fair
so I
enough.
can't
No, all
comment
right.
on that. But in addition, I'm afraid there is going to have to be some asset rationalization, which need not be as dramatic as it sounds. Obviously, there are six borough councils in Guildford West in West Surrey and a county council. Those all have offices, etc., etc. So there are going to be some opportunities for rational asset disposal, but that would be my expectation.
Okay, now our time's coming to an end, unfortunately. But I just want to ask you one last thing. Former local authority CEO Bernard Quarrell, who writes on the Guildford Dragon quite regularly, a man of considerable experience of local government, has said councils today amount to little more than local administration. He's right, isn't he? You're just going to be managers.
I think it's an absolute risk. I agree with him. I agree with him. And this goes back to my comment. I don't think personally, and obviously this is my first time standing, so I'm commenting as an interested outside observer at this stage, but obviously I'm interested in the detail. I think we need at a national level to have a real think about whether this structure is the same. As I've said, there are a whole bunch of statutory obligations that come down from central government. We already know at Surrey County Council, almost three-quarters of its budget goes on requirements set by central government in adult and social care, for example, which leaves roughly 25% for roads, schools, police, fire. I don't think anyone would sensibly think that approach is a good idea in the long run. So personally, I would be advocating for much more devolution.
Thom van Every, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.